cakes, muffins, confectionery, chips or crisp, pretzel, frozen pizza, frozen meals.
What if I said that more than half the calories you consume are from ultra-processed food? That's thought to be the case in countries like the UK and the US.
Most products sold in supermarket are ultra-processed, so it's very difficult to avoid them.
This is The Food Chain from the BBC World Service. I'm Ruth Alexander, and this week we're asking, is this ultra-processed? It's not always easy to know. There are lots of different definitions and a fair amount of confusion. Generally, we're talking about food that's been industrially manufactured.
Yeah, we try to avoid all that stuff, but sometimes we fall into it because they have some special taste that it's hard to say no to it sometimes.
We'll be finding out how to spot it. Mayonnaise. I had this with my lunch. It's ultra-processed. Oh, that surprises me. How to cut down on it, if that's what you want to do.
I think the hardest part is the snack bits, because I've got to pack 2 snacks a day for the kids for school.
And what to eat instead.
That means cooking. It's a huge shift in people's life.
It all started with an email to the food chain at bbc.co.uk from a listener, Jen Sherman, an Australian who lives in California in the United States with her husband and 2 young children. She's been on a drive to reduce the amount of ultra-processed food her family eats, or UPF as she calls it, and suggested we should make a programme about people trying to do that. So we gave her a call.
I like listening to programs about ultra-processed foods. And what I thought was interesting was all of these podcasts talk about it from the science perspective. So they interview the researchers and they talk about the science behind this. And what I thought would be useful was, what does it look like to actually follow their advice? How do you actually follow their advice? Because it's very easy to know the information and to think, right, I shouldn't be eating this much UPF because it's not good for me, it's not good for my kids. But when you have a birthday party every second weekend and there's class parties at school for Valentine's Day and Halloween and Easter, when UPF is everywhere, how do you actually reduce it? Because the other thing about UPF, it's not just the crackers and the biscuits and the lollies. It's also, your pasta sauces and your convenience meals and all the stuff that you might not think of as UPF.
What exactly is ultra-processed food?
Carbonated drinks, fruit and vegetables juices, ready-to-drink tea or coffee, sports and energy drinks, most of the ice cream on the market, commercial cookies, cakes, muffins, confectionery, most of the sweet and savory snacks such as chips or crisp, pretzel.
It would probably have been easier to ask
frozen
what
meals,
isn't
hot
ultra-processed.
dogs, commercial soups, sauces, dressing.
Jean-Claude Moubarak, assistant professor in public and international nutrition at the University of Montreal in Canada, has worked with the team of scientists in Brazil who came up with the term. They proposed the NOVA food classification system in 2010, a new way of categorising foods according to their level of processing.
NOVA is a classification of foods that pays attention to the degree and the purpose of processing. So how much processing is applied to food and why processing is applied. NOVA classify food into 4 main groups. The first one are foods that are fresh or minimally processed,
such as fruits and vegetables, meat, milk and eggs.
Group 2 are ingredients that are refined from food and are used to cook and season food.
Salt, sugar, olive oil, butter, vinegar.
Group 3 are made of foods that are preserved with salt, sugar, and fat, such as canned food, traditional bread and cheese. And the 4th group are ultra-processed, which are formulation of refined substances and additives. Those are products that are not food anymore, but are a collection of substances that are selected to create product of consumption. Irresistible, very appealing, very convenient.
And this is where it starts to get tricky, because some foods can appear in any one of the groups.
For example, yogurt. So you can have a plain yogurt that we would classify as minimally processed. Then when you add sugar to it, it becomes processed food. So yogurt plus sugar. And then you can create also an ultra-processed yogurt by adding flavors and colors and additives such as emulsifiers. You're changing the texture, the color, the taste of the food.
You don't recognise it as food. It's bad for us. You and the group of scientists who came up with this classification believe.
Ultra-processed products are very different from normal food. They're made to mimic food and to be more appealing. So for any food on the market, there's an ultra-processed version of it. And the ultra-processed version has additives and substances that we don't use in kitchens.
The positives of processing is that it can make food cheaper, last longer, look and taste appetising, but it may not be good for us. A number of studies have shown an association between ultra-processed food and increased risk of health problems, such as obesity, high blood pressure and cholesterol, cardiovascular disease and cancer. But it's hard to prove for sure that it's the level of processing causing this, rather than something else, such as lifestyle, or simply the fact that ultra-processed foods can contain high levels of salt and sugar. But scientists continue to investigate, and 8 countries, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, Uruguay, Israel, France and Belgium, are advising consumers to avoid ultra-processed food. Easier said than done, as our listener Jen can attest.
I read ingredient lists. I assume until proven otherwise that anything I find in the supermarket is UPF.
Oh, right. Guilty till proven innocent, in your view.
Pretty much.
And how challenging has it been overall? Like, how big an impact has this had on your day-to-day life?
It means I cook a lot. It means I spend a lot of my time in the kitchen. But some of it is because I want to, and some of it is because I can. You can use the slow cooker a lot, which is fantastic. There's a handful of recipes that I do that's just you chuck the stuff in the slow cooker in the morning and then 8 hours later you've got dinner. I think the hardest part is the snack bits. So because I've got to pack 2 snacks a day for the kids for school. And what I've done is I use fruit and vegetables as their snack a lot of the time. I do a lot of carrot sticks and capsicum, or bell peppers, cucumbers. We do berries, so blueberries and strawberries tend to last pretty well.
Have you cut out all ultra-processed foods? Has that been possible?
No, I've got boxes of mac and cheese in the backup pantry.
Macaroni cheese?
Yep, I'm going to have a bunch of boxes in the pantry as backup.
So in an ideal world, would you cut all ultra-processed food out? But in reality, you've discovered all you can do really is reduce it. You can't live without it, practically.
Pretty much.
Mm. And what do friends and families and other parents think of your mission to radically cut down on ultra-processed food? I mean, do you tell them about it? Do they know?
I don't tend to talk about this because I don't want to present myself as a crusader, despite talking to you on the BBC food chain. I don't want to present myself in real life as some kind of crusader against food that is so common in most households with small children, or even without small children. Like, I don't want to make people think I'm judging them for what they're eating or what they're feeding their families, because I'm not, because money is also a factor. And sometimes if you're feeding 30 or 40 people at a 4-year-old's birthday party, you go for the cheaper pizza because that's what is affordable. And a lot of the time in the short term, UPF is cheaper.
From your own experience, do you think it's practical, like doable for other people? Because you don't go out to work, do you? So you do have more time than many people listening to cook and prepare food from scratch at home.
I mean, it's impractical for me to entirely cut it out. So I think it's impractical for anyone to entirely cut it out. But I think it's definitely possible to reduce it. Try and reduce a bit at a time. Because for any change, like drastic change, is very hard to do and very hard to sustain long term. If you've been eating UPF a lot and suddenly trying to cut it all out, like that's going to be hard. But if you just change one meal a week, just, cook one of them, cook 2 of them.
When you're out there in the supermarket trying to figure out what is ultra-processed and what isn't, would a UPF label be useful?
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love that.
Listener Jen Sherman. Well, someone who tried the drastic route is programme producer Beatrice Pickup, didn't you, Beatrice? You set yourself a challenge in January to cut out all ultra-processed food. Was that fun?
Well, like all good New Year's resolutions, I failed on day one. We went for a New Year's Day walk, ended up in a pub, and I didn't want to have an alcoholic drink because I'd had a few the night before. And in fact, alcohol usually is processed, whereas all the soft drinks in the pub that day were ultra-processed. So I found myself with a bit of a difficult choice in terms of which was the healthier option. And ultimately, I went for an ultra-processed soft drink.
Could have gone for water. So what did you have to try and avoid then?
Bread was quite a big one for us, and we don't have a bakery locally where we live. Stock cubes was a surprising one for me. I hadn't realised that if I'm making a meal from scratch but adding an ultra-processed stock cube to it, obviously that's a fail for me.
I didn't realise that either. Oh dear.
Did get me into good habits though, making stock from scratch and making a big batch of it and putting it in the freezer so that when I do want to make a meal using stock, I already had some.
Which food did you miss the most?
Crisps. Crisps are my favourite snack. So that was quite a big one for me for the month of January. But I didn't realise until the making of this programme that in fact I could have been having crisps as long as they were just the plain salted variety. So I did miss out there.
But that, again, there's the quandary. If you'd known that and you'd had the plain ready salted crisps, that wouldn't necessarily have been
I assume that they're
any good for
ultra-processed
you.
food because I think of crisps as junk food. But in fact, it's the flavourings that are the problem there.
And what would you say your biggest take-home was about the whole thing? Biggest learning?
It did take a lot of thought and planning and effort. It was mostly doable, and it did get me into some good habits, and there was cooking more, and it's a reminder that it's actually quite easy to make a lot of things. We made pizza one weekend, for example, which was great. Although I did get into a bad baking habit. I started baking cakes every weekend when I'm not someone who normally buys a lot of cakes or biscuits. So in some ways, my sugar consumption might have gone up.
Interesting. How good was it when February came around, finally?
I bought a big bag of crisps.
Oh, good then. Thanks, Beatrice. It's been 14 years since Jean-Claude Moubarak's colleagues came up with their definition of ultra-processed food, and in his view, created a new understanding of what it is we're eating.
I think it has a huge impact in changing how people think about food. The most important thing we've done is to change the mind of the people from nutrients to practices. So before Nova, people were talking about fiber, about sugar, about salt. With Nova, we talk about why we process food and why we use such additive versus natural substances. It's a change in the way people think about food, and we're getting also an impact on policies, but it's something that it's a little slower to obtain because there's a lot of resistance in the market from companies that are producing those ultra-processed food.
You helped devise Brazil's national food policy in 2014, which advised against eating ultra-processed food. Do you think it's made a difference to what people are buying and how much ultra-processed foods they're consuming?
To my knowledge, no. In order to change the food system, you need to have strong political will. What happened in Brazil in the last 10 years was a lot of change in terms of the government. So it's hard to answer this question, but we don't see an impact on the data in terms of sales or consumption or in terms of health.
Is there any country you've seen that you're impressed by and you think, yes, this is the beginning of it?
For example, in Chile, in Mexico, there is strong policies to control ultra-processed food, such as taxation and labeling, and also restriction of marketing to kids. In those countries, they have shown some impact on reducing sales and consumption of ultra-processed food.
In many countries, you can find nutrition labels on the front of food packaging, but Chile is one of the few to make them mandatory. In 2016, it said that foods with high levels of added salt, sugar and saturated fats, or with a high calorie content, must carry prominent warning labels. In light of these changes, our reporter Jane Chambers has been talking to people about the decisions they're now making about what food they buy.
I'm in the local supermarket on the outskirts of a seaside town called Quintero, and it's full of produce. There's bread, cereals, chocolate, crisps, coffee, all the usual things you would normally see in a supermarket. And I found a shopper willing to talk to me. Your name is?
Hi, Elizabeth.
And we've got these black labels that they put on food here in Chile that's been on it for quite a few years now that show if it's high in salt or sugar or fat. When you're buying, are you aware of the labels? Do they make a difference to what you buy?
Yeah, now it does. It makes a difference for me, and we really try to avoid that. But anyway, when we are in a hurry, I think we just pick the things that we know already and the things that we like.
So do you sometimes forget about the labels if you're in a hurry?
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, because I think there's also all the tasty food and all the nice food that normally the kids like is like full of labels and sugar and all that things.
So it's a kind of ultra processed food that they like.
Yeah, so even you try to avoid it, it's easier to buy, and most of the people we buy that kind of food because it's cheaper.
What about since the labels have come in, have you been surprised that some food you might have thought was healthy hasn't been as healthy as you think?
The cereal bars, and the things for the lunch for my kid. I used to think that it was healthy, but now I realize since the labels that there's not really healthy.
I'm off now just a couple of miles down the road to the beach to meet another parent who I know is interested in the labels and what's going on with ultra-processed food and what he feeds his children. You can probably hear the sounds of cooking. That's because Diego Arenas is busy making lunch for his two children, Gaston and Emma. It's smelling good. You've got fish for lunch with garlic.
Yeah, garlic and ginger.
When you're making things like lunch for your children, feeding your children, what kind of things do you like to cook for them?
They always want to have something really sweet and the usual stuff that they see everywhere. So it's not easy not to give them an ice cream or lots of sweets and stuff. So we try to make them nice and sweet and healthy things. Natural ice creams and things from fruits.
And what about the black labels that show if it's high in salt or sugar or fat? Is that something you're aware of when you go shopping, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, we are aware. They know that they can ask for some food, but if it's one full of them with 3 or 4 of these black labels, we try to avoid them.
And you've got Gaston, your son, sitting beside you, and Emma across eating your delicious fish with ginger that you've just made. What kind of treats do they like to have when they can have it?
Oh, Emma likes a lot some like jelly and sweet and sour stuff, like gums. And he likes hot stuff like nachos. It's a special treat. Or when they go to a birthday or something like that. Or for Halloween. Or for some other special times.
And if there was a label that said something was ultra-processed food, would you like to see labels like that, like the other black labels? Would that help when you're shopping?
Yeah, they should. They should be like that. I don't know. But yeah, we try to avoid all that stuff. But sometimes we fall into it because they have some special taste that it's hard to say no to it sometimes.
Parents in Chile talking to Jane Chambers. So nutrition warning labels on foods may not be the silver bullet that transform our shopping habits, but Jean-Claude Mubarak believes they're worth having.
There's a limit to those warning labels, but it's a first step to give a strong message to the population that not everything at the supermarket is healthy. And that's a major shift because up till recently, our guidelines never talked about what to avoid. You know, guidelines usually are about what to eat. So you eat more fruits, more vegetables, more yogurt, but we rarely talk about what to avoid. So those labels are a first step to show to consumers not everything on the market is healthy. Try to think and choose wisely.
How can someone spot an ultra-processed food and avoid it?
The easiest way would be just to flip it around. I would say the best food in the market are food that have no labels. So those are easy to identify. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, meat, milk, everything that is made of one ingredient is healthy by definition. Now, of course, it depends on how you cook it and how you combine it. But when you choose a product at the supermarket, if it's made of one ingredient, it's healthy. Then when you go into those products that have a list of ingredients, try to choose the product that have the most simple list of ingredients and avoid those that have ingredients that you don't use in your kitchen. When you don't understand the list of ingredients, then leave it aside and go for a product that has a list of ingredients that you recognize.
I noticed that there are some foods that would be classified by your system as ultra-processed foods that actually there's an important need for. Baby formula is one. Gluten-free products are important for some people with celiac disease, for example. I mean, there is considerable debate about all this, isn't there?
When we talk about celiac disease or this case of milk formula, to me, these are miracles that saves lives, but I see this as medicine. When you cannot give breastfed milk to your kid, then you need an alternative. And what we have is milk formula, which is the next best thing we have. But to me, it's a medication.
Do you manage to avoid ultra-processed food entirely?
So what we try is not to bring them at home. So it's not part of our regular pantry. But do we sometimes consume them outside the house? Yes, because we do live in society like everyone else.
Jean-Claude Mubarak. In my house, we cook most meals from scratch, so I have presumed that I don't eat much ultra-processed food. But let's see now. I've downloaded an app that says it can tell me how good the nutritional content of a product is and whether it's ultra-processed. So here on the countertop is wholemeal sliced bread. I'm scanning the barcode and the app tells me this is nutritionally very good quality. But oh, it's ultra-processed. Confusing. Right, dark chocolate, an occasional treat. Okay, probably a too frequent treat. Nutritionally bad. That's probably not a surprise. But it gets a green dot telling me that it's not ultra-processed. Mixed messages again. Let's have a rummage in my fridge. Mayonnaise. I had this with my lunch. It's ultra-processed. Oh, that surprises me. Mustard. Now this, I imagine, is just processed, not ultra-processed. Wrong. What's in mustard? Stabiliser xanthan gum. What's in my freezer? Fish fingers. I think of this as making a healthy meal. Yep, nutritionally good. And ultra-processed. I wonder what's for dinner tonight then. The app is by Open Food Facts, a non-profit organisation set up 10 years ago as an online database of food products. There are more than 3 million items listed, and anyone, anywhere can add a product, as co-founder Pierre Slamiche explained to me.
So you will take the picture of the ingredient list, artificial intelligence will extract it, and we will recognize all the ingredients. And if we spot some markers of ultra-processing, then the food will be labeled as so. Most products sold in supermarket are ultra-processed. So it's very difficult to avoid them. We explain in Open Food Fact the ingredient that actually causes the food to be ultra-processed.
It's not so clear, even with your app, to work out what is and isn't a good choice, though, I found. I mean, for example, the sliced brown bread, wholemeal bread that I'd bought, when I zapped it with the app, it came up as being very good nutritional quality and ultra-processed. So there's conflicting information out there.
So yeah, it's a big problem because foods that are nutritionally healthy, that don't have too much salt, too much fat, too much sugar, still will have additives. The rule of thumb is to try and get the food, if you can't find anything that's not ultra-processed, try to pick the one with the least amount of additives. As a French person, I would say buy your bread from the boulangerie. But if you go for the supermarket bread, look for the one with fibers and look for the one that have the least amount of additives.
I wonder, is there a risk that people get overly and maybe needlessly anxious about what they're eating? I mean, I could have probably happily spent a good couple of hours scanning everything in my kitchen cupboards yesterday.
So there's no point in being too anxious about it. Having a moment when you realize that a lot of it is ultra-processed, and then trying to do your own cooking if possible, trying to stick to the shortest ingredient list possible. So anything above 5 to 10 ingredients is probably a bit complicated. And be careful about false trends. Some food will be packaged and marketed as healthy food, as authentic food, but sometimes it can hide a UPF. If you don't recognize most ingredients, put it back on the shelf.
Pierre Slamiche. We made a programme called Do We Need to Talk About Ultra-Processed Food in 2021. Then we asked Kate Halliwell, the Chief Scientific Officer at the UK's Food and Drink Federation, which represents manufacturers, how aware their members were of the term ultra-processed foods.
We've, of course, heard of it, so I'd say there is an awareness, but it isn't a term that we would use, and it isn't something that we're kind of actively working on.
But plenty of other people have been working on it. In 2022, the UK Government Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition said that it was timely to consider this issue, since there was increasing discussion and debate regarding the implications of food processing on health. It concluded that, while concerning, there are uncertainties around the quality of evidence available, and more research was needed. We asked Kate Halliwell whether the industry's position has changed.
Since 2021, we have seen really an explosion of publications, I would say, in this space. We have also had a lot more media interest in this topic. So I think that has led to generally people being more interested in it, as well as some confusions over what it actually means and what's the appropriate response for companies to it. So we have been following the scientific publications that have been ongoing. And I think what's been very helpful to us in the UK is that the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, their conclusion was that the evidence base, although there's a lot, it is still very weak. So as it stands at the moment, they have not recommended that here in the UK we change our guidelines.
There are scientists out there who I think would absolutely disagree that the evidence is weak. I mean, the US National Institutes of Health carried out a randomised controlled trial, the gold standard of scientific studies, and that showed a causal relationship between ultra-processed food and weight gain. So there is emerging scientific evidence that ultra-processed food isn't good for you, but there's debate about what might be going on, why that might be the case.
You know, there's still papers to be published, and actually what SAC and the body I just referred to also said was that what was needed was more randomised control trials, or also cohort studies, they call them. So they don't think that evidence is there yet. Of course, in the future, it might emerge, and if there was something specific that was needed to be overlaid on top of the nutrition guidelines, then, you know, industry would look to understand that and implement it.
Are you not out of step with consumers who are increasingly aware of the concept of ultra-processed food and concerned about it?
So I think consumers are increasingly aware, you're absolutely right. I think they're both concerned and confused, actually, as to what it means, because actually some foods which would be classed as ultra-processed under NOVA would actually fall within those healthy eating guidelines that government recommends. So I think it is confusing, absolutely. And that's why I think for our companies, it's right that we do look to the scientific evidence, but we also follow what our government and our expert committees are recommending that we do.
If scientific research in the future showed a clear causal link between ultra-processed food and ill health, if there was more evidence that clearly pointed in that direction, would the industry and the Federation respond by applying labels that identified the food as ultra-processed? So consumers could make an informed decision when they're in the shopping aisles?
If evidence emerged, which it hasn't yet, but, you know, science evolves all the time. So if evidence emerged that showed there was something specific that needed to go into our dietary guidelines, then yes, of course, industry would respond to that.
Kate Halliwell. So it's unlikely that food and drink manufacturers will be flagging up ultra-processed products anytime soon, and the onus will remain on the individual to spot it. Pierre Slamiche is optimistic, though, that people's buying habits could bring about change.
In a perfect world, basically, food would be clearly labeled front of pack, so you would have clear warnings about ultra-processed food. And that's the final, the eventual point of those apps. It's not basically keeping people captive to scanning products. It's basically changing the formulas of the food offer so that everyone benefits and that there's systemic change in what we buy in the supermarket, that the default choice in the supermarket become the right choices. We believe that if we mobilize, if we team up together, we can force the industry to actually listen to the public, listen to the government, and it changes the balance of power between the food industry and the general public.
Pierre Slamiche. Jean-Claude Moubarak has been advising the Canadian government on its food policies. Has he suggested a label that says ultra-processed?
We haven't suggested that.
Why not?
I think it will be hard because industry changes its practice very quickly. So a label that we be implemented today might not cover some of the ingredients that industry will come up in a year or two.
So you think food companies would just reformulate a product so that it was just as ultra-processed, but using perhaps new ingredients that weren't captured in your original system?
Exactly. To me, it will be more meaningful to raise awareness, and then people can make their decision to prefer food that are less processed. That means cooking, and it's a huge shift in people's life. But I think it needs to start by the understanding how food is made today. And to me, a label will not be enough to cover that.
Jean-Claude Moubarak. It's not always easy to know what is and isn't ultra-processed, and whether in fact all ultra-processed food is bad for you. But our listener Jen knows one thing for sure, that cutting down on convenience foods and taking the time to cook whole foods has been a net positive for her family.
I'm not sure if this is something I'm going to keep doing forever. But I think what I feed myself and what I feed my family, I don't see that changing, because part of it is just this has become normalized in our family, that we cook and we make things from scratch and we like food that tastes yummy.
Thanks to Jen for getting us thinking about ultra-processed food, and thanks to everyone in today's programme. If there's something you'd like us to look into, do what Jen did. Email thefoodchain@bbc.co.uk. We read every message we get. From me and the rest of the team, Beatrice Pickup and Hannah Bewley, thanks for listening, and join us again next week.